Stay with us, show your hands. You here?
Jenny?
Yep.
Jenny?
Yeah.
Oh. The time is 12:12. You're under arrest on suspicion of murder against Jonathan McCulloch and Elias McCulloch.
Yeah,
Okay?
okay.
You don't have to say anything, but it may harm defence. If you do
No,
not
I just
mention
take my cover.
when questioned, so much like to report anything you do so over the evidence. Okay? Alright, your arrest
I'll
is necessary
cooperate, I'll
for a
cooperate.
prompt and effective.
Is there anything in the pocket we should know about?
Yes, there
Where?
is. Can I take you to it?
No, you can tell me.
Can we go in there for a second, just so I can tell you something about what's in there?
This is Virginia McCulloch, a 35-year-old woman who is notorious throughout her hometown of Chelmsford, England, for being a bit of an oddball. However, the people of this small town had no idea what kind of horrific, gruesome darkness she carried inside herself. All anyone knew was that McCulloch lived with her parents, John and Lois, who were both quite old. She supposedly took care of them, but nobody had seen either of them for years. During their absence, McCulloch had started to act increasingly unhinged, creating a sense of unease and fear amongst her neighbors and deep concerns in her siblings. Today, we're going to unpack this bizarre case of Virginia McCulloch, whose deadly deeds remained hidden for 4 years, thanks in no small part to the pandemic. It's the story of a woman who wanted to take everything she could and give nothing in return, and when the chickens threatened to come home to roost, responded with decisive, cold-blooded, lethal action. Born in 1988, McCulloch was the youngest of 5 daughters, and her parents doted on her from the very start. It's pretty common for the youngest child to be the apple of the parent's eye, and this was certainly the case with McCulloch. As far as John and Lois were concerned, she could do no wrong, although her siblings had a different view of her. According to them, McCulloch had always had trouble fitting in with others. She also happened to be a pathological liar, something that would likely help her later on as she tried to cover up her heinous acts for years on end. However, John and Lois's daughters had a very positive view of their parents, at the very least. They remembered John as a constant jokester who loved making people laugh. He enjoyed playing golf and snooker and had a long career in university education before retiring. As for Lois, she had taken a keen interest in history, with a particular interest in the history of the British royal family. Apart from that, she had a habit of making friends all around the world. In the era before the internet, doing so required a lot of effort on her part, including writing countless letters to her pen pals every day. This showed her commitment to maintaining her social connections, although it's fair to say that the distance helped matters rather than make them more difficult. You see, Lois had suffered from severe mental illness for quite some time. She showed signs of obsessive-compulsive disorder, which became so severe towards the end of her life that she required constant care. This was compounded by the fact that she had extreme agoraphobia, or a pathological fear of open spaces. As a result, it was very difficult for her to go outside, even to buy groceries or run other errands. Her husband took care of those aspects of their lives for as long as he could, but he had physical health issues of his own to deal with. By 2019, he was 70 years old and suffered from type 2 diabetes, glaucoma, and hypertension. In other words, John couldn't be very active, and his eyesight was slowly fading. Basically, John and Lois couldn't live on their own. They needed someone to look after them, someone to act as their primary caregiver. That's where their favorite daughter Virginia came in. McCulloch was more than happy to move in with her parents and help them out. They loved her for it, and pretty soon, they'd handed her complete control over their finances. Of course, McCulloch was not the sort of person you could trust with such sensitive matters, but John and Lois had no way of knowing that. When they looked at their daughter, they saw someone pure and perfect, someone who wouldn't hurt a fly. As we'll soon reveal, McCulloch was capable of far more than that. By 2019, McCulloch was living rent-free in the home of her parents for about 2 years. She told them she had a high-paying job as a web designer, but they refused to let her pay rent due to how much she helped them around the house. She also said that she was working on her career as an artist and that once she made it big, she'd take really good care of them and make sure they lived in the lap of luxury. There's no two ways about it. McCulloch was lying through her teeth about everything. For starters, she didn't have a job as a web designer. In fact, the last time she held down a job at all was in 2017 when she had worked as a bartender for a local pub. She had no source of income to speak of, so in a way, It was she that needed her parents rather than the other way around. As for her so-called art career, McCullough apparently didn't have any talent to speak of. She never showed her work at a gallery, and she never tried to study formally at an art institution. If anything, it seemed like a pipe dream. She might have had some aspirations of painting professionally, but there's no evidence whatsoever that she took this goal seriously, and there's a chance that it was all just part of a ruse. You see, McCullough profited greatly from her parents. As soon as her father let her control of the finances, she started taking money out of their savings. However, she didn't buy anything fancy with the money, or really anything useful at all. Instead, she frittered most of it away on online gambling and lost a fair amount in various scams as well. As if that wasn't enough, McCullough had also started to take out several loans under her parents' names. All told, she'd incurred a debt of about £60,000, and it was just a matter of time before John and Lois started noticing discrepancies in their finances. When John took a look at his bank account one day, he noticed that the number was far smaller than it should have been. He asked McCullough about it, assuming that there had been some kind of mistake. There were small withdrawals every single day, and there was no way that his baby girl could be responsible for something like that. McCullough was responsible, of course, but she wasn't going to let John find out about that. Instead, she concocted a story about the bank making errors and hackers potentially stealing money from John's account and told him that she'd take care of it. In the back of her mind, McCullough knew that her time was running out. Sooner or later, John would find out that she'd been stealing from him, and there was no telling what he might do. At the very least, he'd kick her out of the house, and McCullough would have to start paying rent somewhere else. Since she didn't have a job and relied on her parents completely, this would be a catastrophic change in circumstance for her. In March of 2019, McCullough started cooking up a plan to cover her tracks. Unfortunately for John and Lois, this plan involved wiping them off the face of the earth. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. On June 18, 2019, the other 4 daughters of Lois and John received a text from their parents informing them that they were on vacation in the nearby seaside town of Clacton-on-Sea. Later that night, they received another text wishing them good night. McCullough was the only one living at the residence for quite some time. Pretty soon, neighbors started noticing Lois and John's absence and began inquiring about them. Each time they'd ask, McCullough would say that her parents were sick or off on vacation. Some wondered how long of a vacation the elderly couple could possibly take. They were known to love the seaside, often going for days just to walk along the shore, but weeks had passed without any sign of them. This was a cause for concern, but at the same time, Lois was known to be reclusive. Her agoraphobia meant that she usually stayed indoors as much as possible. So while her and John's absence were a tad strange, it wasn't entirely out of the ordinary. John was a lot more social than his wife, usually going down to the pub on Fridays to meet with his friends. He also went out golfing quite frequently and played snooker at the pub every chance he got. Even so, when Lois was having a particularly bad flare-up of her agoraphobia, he'd stay home with her as well. They loved each other very much, so it was likely that he'd sacrifice some of his social time to help her feel better. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and all the while, no one saw John or Lois at all. However, they did hear from them once in a while. More specifically, Lois would apparently call her doctor to cancel appointments quite often. Her voice sounded strange and unfamiliar, but no one thought twice about it. Her doctor grew concerned that she was missing her appointments, but it would be years before he'd tell anyone about this. And then, in March of 2020, after John and Lois had been absent for about 9 months, something happened that made their disappearance much easier to explain: the pandemic. One thing became clear to the people of Chelmsford: something was deeply wrong with McCullough. She got evasive whenever her parents were mentioned, and neighbors reported hearing her screaming in the home at various times. No one knew if she was screaming at her parents or if she was just having a breakdown, but if it was the former, her parents never replied. McCullough also took part in other forms of bizarre behavior around the town. She began showing up in public places with a clearly fake baby bump, claiming that she was pregnant. Everyone could tell that she was pretending, but no one quite knew how to bring it up. McCullough seemed to have abandoned all logic and reason, and this was just one of the many examples of that. Another example was that she would randomly leave food at her neighbor's front door. And this wasn't home-cooked food either. It was takeout from the local Chinese and fast food places, none of which the neighbors had asked for. She also left bottles of alcohol accompanying the food sometimes, and no one could understand why she was doing things like this. At other times, her neighbors noticed she'd constantly be in the tiny garden next to the home, apparently raking leaves even if there were none lying around. It was almost as if she wanted to stay outside of the home as much as possible, as if there was something in the house that frightened her. Apart from all of this, McCullough also frequently made calls to the police. On one occasion, she claimed that 3 people had tried sneaking into her backyard. These intruders had allegedly attacked her, leaving cuts on her face that seemed almost too perfectly shaped to be caused by human hands. She made dozens more calls, all of which seemed bizarre and unnecessary. After the pandemic wound down and lockdowns were suspended, the disappearance of John and Lois started to get more attention. In September of 2023, their doctor decided that it was time for the police to conduct a welfare check, so he called them and asked them to see how Lois and John were doing. On September 13th, police arrived at the McCullough residence and asked Virginia about her parents. They were treating it as a missing persons case at the time. McCullough claimed that her parents were away and that they'd be back in October, but police found this to be highly suspicious. They now felt that McCullough had killed her parents and was trying to cover it up. After quickly getting a warrant, they headed to the residence to put the matter to rest once and for all. Shortly after 12 p.m. on September 15th, 2023, police forcibly entered McCullough's home with a battering ram.
It's fine. No one in here at the moment. Hold on. The police. Got it.
They found McCullough, who seemed oddly calm about everything. Police suspected that she'd killed her parents, but they needed evidence to prove it in court. Luckily, McCullough was more than willing to tell them all they needed to know.
My dad's body's in there.
Right, okay.
Yep, okay. Obviously I'll
What about
say,
your mum?
a little bit more complicated.
Okay.
It turned out that John and Lois had been dead all along, and McCullough quickly gave the details once she knew she had no other option, although she did seem rather casual about what she'd done.
Cheer up, at least you caught the bad guy.
Basically, when McCullough had started hatching a plan in March, she went and bought massive amounts of prescription medication, as well as a tool for crushing the medication. Then, on the 17th of June, 2019, McCullough created a cocktail of the meds mixed in with an alcoholic drink that she'd served to both her parents. John downed the entire serving and went to sleep, never to wake up again. Lois, on the other hand, didn't finish her glass and was still alive in the morning. When McCullough found her mother still breathing in her bed, she realized that she had to do something to finish the job. At first, she picked up a hammer and slammed it onto her mother's head and body, leaving bloodstains on it that she'd later tell police about. The hammer didn't quite work, so McCullough headed to the kitchen, picked up a knife, and then stabbed her mother to death. It's possible that this was when neighbors heard the screaming. McCullough was likely shocked at what she'd done, but despite that, McCullough went to the bank and opened a new credit card in her mother's name the very next day. She then used this card to go buy jewelry and clothes, which seemed to suggest that she didn't actually feel all that guilty. Police arrested McCullough and brought her to the station, where she gave a full confession to her crimes.
So next bit is very hard to talk about. That's probably the most grisly detail. So on the ground floor, underneath the stairs, there's a few like storage boxes and things. And in the middle, I think it's in one of the boxes or in a bag or something. If you want me to shush after this, it's fine. But every bit helps. You will find forensic clips helpful. There's a hammer. I know, but I'm trying to help you find everything. It's in the middle underneath the stairs. It will still have blood on it. It's rusted, but it will still have blood traces on it.
However, one question still remained. What had she done with the bodies? The answer to this can be traced back to a few days after the murder, when McCullough ordered 40 cinder blocks along with cement. She then used the material to effectively build her father a tomb around his bed, complete with a makeshift wooden door on one end. Before placing her father in the tomb, she wrapped him in around a dozen layers of plastic. Once he was interred, she covered up the tomb with blankets and some of her own paintings. As for Lois, her body didn't get the same kind of reverential treatment. Instead, she was wrapped up in a sleeping bag and placed in a wardrobe, which is where the police found her. As for why she'd done what she did, McCullough claimed that she felt trapped by her situation. Her parents simply weren't able to live without her, and she just wanted to be free. Of course, this completely ignored the fact that she was able to live rent-free and that she'd been stealing money from her parents. On top of that, she'd been living off of her father's pension and overall stole just under £150,000 before she was caught. When news of her horrific acts came to light, people started questioning her behavior even more. If she just killed 2 people, why would she draw attention to herself with a fake pregnancy? Moreover, leaving food and alcohol for her neighbors was even more bizarre now. And the fact that she called the police could be explained in 2 ways. Either she was hoping they'd discover her crime and arrest her, or she wanted to disturb them so much that they'd never take her seriously again. Either way, it took 4 whole years for her to come to justice, and all that was left now was for her to get convicted. On July 4th, 2024, McCullough pleaded guilty to both counts of murder. She was later sentenced to 36 years in prison, a sentence some felt was overly lenient. It's possible that the judge reduced her sentence due to her cooperation with the police. As a result, McCullough will be a free woman if she lives to the age of 71, the same age her parents were when she killed them. Her sisters now have to live with this tragedy. In the aftermath of her sentencing, they released a public statement saying, "Our family has been left devastated and heartbroken at the deaths of our parents, who were taken from us so cruelly. As we try to move forward with our lives, we will remember the happy times we enjoyed with them. Our mom and dad are forever in our hearts and are loved and missed beyond any measure." So, what do you think of this case? Did Virginia McCullough get the sentence she deserved? Or was the judge too lenient with her? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.